Welcome, everyone, to the World Unfiltered podcast, where I, your anonymous host, attempts my best to, talk about the world in an unfiltered way. I just turn on the microphone. We don't edit this. This is not overly produced. It's a real person talking into a microphone about what's going on in the world. And I'm not being controlled that I have to look at it from this perspective or this perspective. And I'm not being limited about what I can talk about. I can talk about anything going on in the world in an unfiltered way. I can talk about it with or without offense to friend or foe. And today, on this Wednesday, February the 21st, 2024, at 11:28 a.m. Central Time, if I'm being honest with you, I'm a little preoccupied. A little bit distracted because just a minute ago, now, I didn't quite live up to the World Unfiltered title, because just a few minutes ago, I was 5 or 6 minutes into this podcast, and all of a sudden my weather radio here just went absolutely crazy because they were doing a test of the weather alert system, which is great, but the radio has this piercing signal, and then it gets louder and louder. So I was going to have to get up and go turn it off because I could not keep recording. So I had to stop the recording. So in a sense, it's the world kind of filtered. I mean, don't we always kind of put on some kind of filter? I'm trying my best to burn the filter down. All right. So, but there, full transparency. Just a few minutes ago, I had to stop this and start it again. So there we go. It's kind of the world a little bit filtered, but this episode, this recording, this is going to be unfiltered. If I make any other mistakes, I'm just going to keep them in. All right. But so I'm a little distracted by that, but my mind is so I'm a little preoccupied, distracted by the whole weather alert test system. Okay. I got that out of the way. But before that, I've been a little preoccupied with a story about mutant wolves who are somehow cancer resistant. Mutant wolves who are somehow cancer resistant. I mean, it sounds like something maybe out of science fiction. It sounds kind of crazy. And when I first looked at the story, I was like, okay, this is interesting. I mean, I could turn on the microphone and tell everyone about, hey, there's these mutant wolves who are resistant to cancer. And I could try to get more information and explain it, maybe try to offer, some kind of explanation. But I'm like, that's not really, I think, the lane I want to take with this. That's not really my little twist I want to put on the story. So what I'm going to attempt to do is give you basic information, not so much trying to interpret it or explain necessarily what that may mean moving forward scientifically or medically. I'm going to then take it and take this weird twist and try to turn it to a more of a theoretical, philosophical question about you and about me and about us as human beings, about humanity. And maybe that will give you something to think about, and you will find it somewhat interesting. So you want to go to this story? All right, let's go to this story. It comes to us from Popular Mechanics. It was published on Saturday, February the 17th, 2024 at 6:45 a.m. Central Time. And here is the headline it was published with. The mutant wolves of Chernobyl have evolved to survive cancer. Oh, wow, that is a headline that got my attention. The mutant wolves of Chernobyl have evolved to survive cancer. Now, the first thing that caught my attention, the mutant wolves, I'm like, oh, that's the name of a new comic book series. The mutant, I don't know if it is, but it could be the mutant wolves, or a new sci-fi channel, mini series, the mutant wolves. It could be anything, a Netflix series. It could be anything. The mutant wolves. I was thinking comic book because that just seems like, we could do some things with that, right? So that got my attention. The mutant wolves. The next thing that really set my mind in motion, and especially my imagination, was the word Chernobyl. whenever I think about the area of Chernobyl and that surrounding area around it, I'm not saying this is scientifically accurate. I'm not saying that this is factual. I'm just telling you what I feel, how my mind works. That whole area around Chernobyl, it just feels to me. Now, I've never been there. I've seen photographs, but it just feels to me, just the word itself just evokes this feeling of something like apocalyptic and eerie and frightening and scary and almost like a supernatural presence that just makes you feel like, oh, don't go there. Like Chernobyl, it just has this feeling. And when you add mutant wolves to Chernobyl, okay, that's already crazy. But then they have evolved to survive cancer. They're somehow cancer resistant. Oh, this has definitely got my attention. And then the author of the story, or whoever put together the photograph right underneath it, oh, they only got my imagination moving faster, because here, the photograph right under the headline, it's like a grayish sky. It just gives you the feeling of like cold, but it's like this gray backdrop. You see some trees and there's not a leaf on the tree. The trees look dead, which just reminds me of Chernobyl. Then there's this old wooden abandoned structure. I don't know if it was a house. I don't know if it was a barn. I don't know what it was, but it's abandoned, which gives you that eerie, like apocalyptic end of the world vibe. And then there are 3 wolves standing in the snow, and they have their heads back like they're about to howl. And you're about to give out their cry. And it's just like, whoa, this is crazy. So we got mutant wolves, we've got Chernobyl, we've got somehow they're cancer resistant. We got this photograph really getting my mind working. Here's now some of the facts of the story. All right. So there's a little bit of my feelings. Now I'm going to give you the facts, and then we're going to take this weird twist to kind of, I don't know, this theoretical philosophical question. So are you ready to explore? Here we go. The Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, abbreviated CEZ, the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone has quickly become a 1,000 square mile science experiment, as experts use the highly irradiated zone as a chance to understand animal biology placed under those extreme conditions. So you have Chernobyl. It's a 1,000 square mile science experiment because it's a highly irradiated zone, right? So you're like, nobody wants to go in there, right? Like, okay, this is bad. But there are animals who live there. So then scientists can kind of stand back and go, whoa, this is like a giant science experiment. And so one of the animals they're obviously looking at happens to be obviously wolves. Right? And because these animals are put into these extreme conditions. Wolves are not the only thing they're looking at, but wolves are at least a part of this story. Very next little, paragraph, bullet statement. Because what they do is underneath the photograph, they kind of give you these like bullet summaries of the entire story. So we'll read these bullet statements, and then I'll go down and pull some things from the story. Biologist from Princeton University studied wolves in the CEZ, or the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, for a decade and found that they're thriving compared to neighboring wolf packs. Now, probably one of the reasons they're thriving in the Chernobyl zone is because likely due to reduced human contact. I mean, no humans are going in that area, so they're going to thrive at least in that way. But here's what's really crazy. They have these genetic mutations that protect against cancer. So these wolves living in this irradiated zone actually have now a genetic mutation that protects them against cancer. Oh, that's fascinating to me. Now, biologists are working with other cancer experts to see if these particular mutations could have therapeutic use for humans. Now that is fascinating to me. I don't know How promising that is, I cannot make any prediction because I do not have said qualifications to make those predictions. That's why we're going to take this in a more theoretically philosophical area where I think I'm much more qualified to do that. I don't know about the medical hope that comes from this. I hope, and let me stress, I hope that it will work in some way, shape, or form. It will lead to some kind of major discovery about how to eradicate cancer from humanity. I hate cancer. I doubt there's anyone who listens to this episode who would say, hey, who wouldn't say they hate cancer. Everyone hates cancer. I lost my father to cancer. Everyone hates it. So if this can lead to some kind of discovery that could eradicate cancer, I'm all for it. But let's dig into this story because I still want to know about these mutant wolves and how that they become cancer resistant. Here's a little bit about this, all right? Here's a little bit of information. On April the 26th, 1986, disaster struck the small town of Chernobyl. At that point, it was a part of the Soviet Union, when a series of steam explosions led to a nuclear meltdown. The apocalyptic event impacted hundreds of thousands of people and greatly impacted the surrounding environment. But nearly 40 years later, something strange is happening. The Chernobyl exclusion zone, a roughly 1,000 square mile perimeter around the nuclear plant, is slowly becoming one of the world's biggest science experiments for exploring the long-term effects of ionizing radiation. While humans might have abandoned the area, other animals stuck around. In 2016, a study found that the eastern tree frogs in the CEZ, or the Chernobyl exclusion zone, exhibited different characteristics than their neighboring cousins. And in 2023, another study discovered distinct genetic differences between Chernobyl dogs and dogs living only 10 miles away in Chernobyl City. Now, Princeton University biologists are exploring another strange characteristic of the CEZ. Its unexpected thriving wolf population. The result of the decade-long study were presented at the annual meeting of Society of Integrative and Comparative Biology in January. So they've been doing this study and they're finding out some things about the wolves. Now, I'm going to just give you some basic information here. Again, my goal here is not to make any predictions or even really to explain the science. Just want you to know, and then we're going to take it in the direction I want to take it. All right, so here's a little bit of what they have to say. Analyzing wolves in the CEZ is particularly interesting because they're apex predators, aka the top of the food chain. This is usually a privileged position in an ecosystem, but when the ecosystem is inundated with radiation, these animals are forced to eat irradiated prey that ate irradiated plants that grew out of irradiated soil. Basically, it's radiation all the way down. This would seem to suggest that wolves would be particularly impacted in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. But Love says that isn't happening. In fact, she told NPR earlier this month that wolf populations in the CEZ are actually 7 times more dense than in protected wildlife areas. Now, so even in areas where they're protected, somehow they're thriving in the CEZ zone. They're thriving even, in fact, they said 7 times more dense. Now you would think, okay, wait a minute. If wolves in an unprotected area where they're going to have more human contact, humans may be shooting them, other things are going to happen. But if they're in a protected area where they don't have all of the radiation and the irradiated food and the entire irradiated ecosystem, You would think then the ones in the CE zone, they would be less. They wouldn't be near as dense. So what is happening? Well, they go on to add a little bit more information. Gray wolves offer a really interesting opportunity to understand the impacts of chronic, low-dose, multi-generational exposure to ionizing radiation. So they're like, this gives us a chance to see what happens if I mean, in this particular case, wolves, what would be the impact of chronic, low-dose, multi-generational exposure to ionizing radiation. Campbell Stanton said in an NPR interview, and I quote, "As an evolutionary biologist, the very first question in my mind was whether or not this radiation was enough of a stressor to actually be a selective pressure." In 2014, the Princeton team attached collars to those CEZ wolves with both GPS and radiation detectors in an effort to understand the population's response to Chernobyl's cancer-causing radiation. They discovered over time that the wolves were consistently exposed to radiation 6 times higher than the legal limit for humans. Now, the theory between Love and Campbell Stanton's theory is that the wolves are experiencing a kind of a rapid natural selection, only likely caused by the equally rapid change in the surrounding environment. Some wolves within the CEZ contain genes that made them more resistant to cancer than other wolves. All right? While still getting cancer at the same rate, these resilient wolves simply weren't as impacted, allowing them to pass on those genes to future generations. So in general, we found that the fastest evolving regions within Chernobyl are in and around genes that we know have some role in cancer immune response or anti-tumor immune response. So in some weird way, they keep being exposed to this radiation. They ultimately, a mutation occurs and they become actually resistant to these cancer or tumors having any impact. They still may get it, but they somehow have some kind of immunity to it, some kind of anti-tumor thing happening within them. Now, I'm not here to explain all of the medicine of it or the science of it, but it made me think, well, that's kind of crazy. You have a generation of wolves being exposed, which puts them at greater risk, right? Puts them at great risk because they're being exposed to, with 6 times the level even, allowed even for humans. So in some ways you think they're in grave danger. But yet the long-term effect, maybe the short-term effect for some of the generations may have been devastating and may have been negative. Maybe, I can't say for sure. But long-term, they're passing on this like cancer immunity to future generations. Now, at that point, that's when I kind of became more philosophical. That's when I kind of left the science of it and became more theoretical, hypothetical, philosophical. So let me ask you a question. What if, now this is hypothetical, this is theoretical. All right. By no means am I saying this is what should happen. I'm not even saying it's possible, but just play along. Let's pretend that all of a sudden, all of the experts around the world announced in peer-reviewed journals and on television everywhere, hey, ladies and gentlemen, we think we know how we can eradicate cancer in 4 generations. Now, what it's going to require is some sacrifice for the current generation and the next 2 or 3. Here's what we propose. We're going to take all of those who are young, who have not yet produced children, and we're going to take the man and the woman, and we're going to expose them to some level of radiation. This may lead to them getting cancer. This may lead to them suffering and dying. But after prolonged exposure to them, they go on and produce children. And then the next generation produces children. And what we think we have, and let's say that they say we've proven this because of the mutant wolves in Chernobyl, that 3-4 generations, the children that will be born at that time will have a built-in immunity to cancer, and cancer will no longer be a thing. It will be gone. Now, you may suffer in this generation. You may suffer in the next generation, but 3 or 4 generations down the road, all of the problems will be gone. No more cancer. We can eradicate cancer forever. Let's say that that's the case. Let's first start with you as an individual. I don't know how old you are, but let's just imagine you're 20, you're 21. And they're like, hey, now here's how it's going to work. You're going to get an appointment, and you're going to have to go to this appointment for, 5-6 days or 5 or 6 months, whatever it is. And you're going to be exposed to radiation. Now, over time, there's a high probability you're going to get cancer. Over time, you're probably going to possibly die, but you're going to be exposed to it. You're going to produce children, and then the same thing's going to happen to them. And this multi-generational exposure hopefully will then spark mutations that then will create an immunity to cancer. Well, they would say, not hope, that this is how it's going to work. But what you're doing, you're suffering now. You're sacrificing now so that your great grandkids never have to worry about cancer ever again. Would you do it? Would you do it? Now, there's a high probability that a large percentage of the population would be like, absolutely not. Not going to do it. This is my life. I'm going to live it. I'm not going to worry about doing anything for 3 or 4 generations. No, we may not say it that bluntly. We may not say it that explicitly, but there would be a little bit. Come on, there would have to be a little bit of that. Would you do so if you knew you could eradicate cancer 3 or 4 generations down the road? Now, you wouldn't be alive to see it, but you would know your contributions, because you would then hopefully develop this mutation and then pass it along. And then they would pass it along. And as that mutation developed 3 or 4 generations down the road, bring on cancer. I've got a built-in resistance, just like the wolves way back in the olden days did at Chernobyl. This is what the future generations would be saying. And then my great-great-grandparents were willing to go through it. Now, I know what you're saying. That's the most ridiculous, crazy. I know. Look, I'm telling you, it's hypothetical. It's theoretical. I know that. But my question is, would we do it? And I don't think we would. And this raises the ultimate philosophical question. How many problems are we currently dealing with today as a society? And we're suffering them because previous generations would not sacrifice. And what problems are going to be present in the next generation or because we won't sacrifice in the present? Because some solutions cannot occur unless there is sacrifice, unless there is possibly suffering in the present. Sometimes there cannot be any resolution of the problems unless some generation says, we're willing to suffer, we're willing to sacrifice, because this has to stop. Now, of course, the wolves and our story about the mutant wolves, they don't have a say-so. Right? That's where they ended up, in that area. That's where they ended up. And that's where their pack is. And that's where their territory is. So one generation moves on to the next generation. And as they're eating this irradiated soil and irradiated prey, and they begin to develop this mutation, they pass it on. They don't even know what's going on. But all of a sudden, they're the powerful wolves on the block, right? The wolves 10 miles away, they are not like the Chernobyl wolves. The Chernobyl wolves are like, hey, we have a resistance to cancer. We almost have an anti-tumor mutation inside of us. They didn't have any say-so. When it comes to humans, then we're going to be like, no. But I'm just curious. How many problems are going to continue generation after generation because the present won't say, hey, we got to sacrifice. We got to give something up. We don't like to give anything up. We want our rights. We want things our way. We want to eat and drink and be merry because tomorrow we die. And we sometimes don't care that we're just passing it down the road. We're just causing problems in the future. And you can apply this to all kinds of social and economic and political issues. Remember, this is unfiltered. I'm not beholden to any team. So I don't care if this offends left or right. Some point, maybe instead of looking at being left or right, we look at being human beings and realize we've got, like, write down the top. I mean, just something you could do just for your own mental exercise. Write down the top 5 problems you think are facing our country or humanity right now. Now, then ask yourself, were those problems present in the previous generation? I think in almost every case, you're going to be like, yeah, those problems were already there. What did they do? In many cases, they did nothing. They kicked the can down the road. And then guess what we will do? We'll kick the can down the road. Now, we love to always create villains in the present and say it's their fault, but typically the problems go way before the current generation. So philosophically speaking, would you? What would you suffer now to save the future generation? What would you? I don't know how much I would. I don't know how much I would. I'm just going to be honest with you because I got one life. I got one shot at this. It's here and it's gone. It's hard to think about the people in the future when I'm so worried about the present. And maybe that's why we can never resolve any of our problems. Now, that is the World Unfiltered for this Wednesday, February the 21st.